Hi, I'm Gerd Tundle, acclaimed health journalist, turned motivational speaker, and transformational coach. This show is for anyone who wants to lead a happier, healthier, and inspired life. Create more self-love, inject more joy and abundance into their daily life. Join me for inspiring interviews and spiritual topics so you can become a soul warrior. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Get Inspired with Gerds podcast. I'm your host, and today I have a beautiful guest with me who's assisting people in creating dynamic shifts in their consciousness. Christine Sinclair is a spiritual mastery teacher and author who helps people create transformational shifts in all areas of their lives, including health, relationships, and careers. Through her spiritual mastery, she teaches her own clients how they can do anything in their highest self. She has been featured in the Huffington Post, Mind, Body, Green, and believes we can all claim our power back. Christian, it's an absolute pleasure having you on my show, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here.
Oh, bless you. Your work just truly inspires me, and just like the work in your life, I definitely know there's a big story behind it. So can you tell the listeners what your life was like before you became a spiritual master teacher?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in spirituality. My parents were figures in the spiritual community, so I grew up around a lot of different modalities and belief systems, and I got to experience a lot of that stuff. And I always had intuition. I've always been very intuitive, psychic, whatever you want to call it, and had a very strong connection, but I had a lot of false beliefs that I wasn't good enough, that I was inferior. And I really dove into spirituality with the way I think a lot of people do, which is with this belief of I'm not good enough, but I'll be good enough when, kind of a thing. So I always have believed in God, but I felt like I wasn't good enough for God. And that was kind of the spring point for all of my spiritual practice. So I kind of just thought like, okay, if I do this modality, I'll release this. If I do this block, I'll do this. And it was all this like, I'm going to be better. I'm going to achieve more. I'm going to be the best in spirituality. I'm going to be the best spiritual person I can be. And it just, I always fell short and never felt complete. Everything always felt really empty. And I would do one practice just to dig something else up and then kind of like never feel like I was progressing. It was just like a continuous vicious cycle. So I started, like most people on this path, I hit a rock bottom, and from there, I just really didn't know. It kind of was just like, I have to walk away from God. I have to walk away from spirituality. I don't know what else to do. And I felt like I had tried everything because my whole life I had been exposed to spirituality and had practiced so much. So I got to this point where it was just like, nothing's good enough. I'm not good enough. Nothing I do is good enough. I release one trigger just to have something else birth, and it just was horrible all the time. So I walked away from it and thought I could do better, and didn't. Did increasingly worse, and finally got to a point where I realized I had been practicing spirituality through ego, which was believing that I wasn't good enough, and I wasn't really practicing spirituality the right way, which was actually connecting with God, spirit, source, whatever, and having a relationship with that. It was this very inferior position rather than a actual healthy relationship. So I started practicing having a relationship with God and letting go of what I actually believed about God, and letting go of all this negativity about God, and that I wasn't good enough. And when I started developing my relationship and I started understanding what God was, I started understanding what I was and what we all are as souls. And that shifted my whole paradigm and consciousness and everything. It has changed my life. And from that's when I started working with clients and seeing what it does in their lives and what it's done in my life since then. That's why I focus on spiritual mastery. It's this treating of a root problem. And then it just trickles into finances and health and relationships, and it's just so powerful. And it's never about doing more. It's actually kind of about doing less. It's about letting go and surrendering, and it's not this constant, you have to release this, you have to do this, it's none of that anymore. It's actually the undoing of all of that. And it impacts in such powerful, epic ways.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's interesting what you said, actually, because growing up myself, like I grew up in like a religious background. And then I think in my early 20s, I kind of walked away from God or the universe or higher source, whatever you guys want to call it. And when I went away, like yourself, things just got bad. Everything went wrong. My life spiraled out of control. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know how I felt anymore. I didn't know how to kind of deal with my emotions as well. Whereas when I would go to the temple as a kid, like it would ground me and I'd feel a lot calm, even though I didn't really understand about what a lot of the things that was being said. It was just being in that presence around people that were feeling the same feeling that I was. And it was about 5 or 6 years ago, when I had my own transformation, that I went back, but I went in a different light. Because growing up, when you went to like a temple, I don't know if yourself, like Christian, like it's not actually about God, it's about what other people are thinking or talking about you within that community. That's what pushed me away from God. And when I realised that it's only my relationship with God or the higher power that needed to just be the most important thing, I went back with a different light. And when I went back with a different light, it gave me this sense of release and empowerment.
Yeah, it's incredible, because after working with clients for so many years, and even from my own experience, I really started to notice this common thread of that we don't really have an understanding of God. It's all what we've been told.
Yeah.
And so that relationship is like, I mean, if you think about it, like everything is from our parents or church or society or movies or whatever, or false interpretations of certain books or whatever, so it's like it's all like hearsay. And so then we're trying to have a relationship. It's like if you were going to date somebody and you meet them, and then it's like, oh well, I've heard these things about you, so this is how I feel about you based on those. That relationship would never work. And that's how it is with God. It's like we try to have this relationship with spirit based off of what we've heard, not actually experienced ourselves. And then we're wondering why it's not working out.
Yeah. It's kind of like we base it on what we've heard rather than what we feel. That's what I found. Yeah.
Yeah, or our own experience.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I did. When I went back, I went with a different approach. And, obviously I was raised in a particular way, but I went to a Christian school, so I was really confused growing up. Then I always believed, in other religions, like the way they are, like, respecting everybody. So I never really understood what my personal relationship was with God, because like you said, I was taught that it should be this way or it should be that way. And when I went back, I had a different approach and said, do you know what, let me just talk to God and ask what is going on. And once I had that connection and started to talk to God and say, or higher power, like, what is it that I'm supposed to do in this world, then all the answers came. Then I understood my relationship, and now it doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks.
Yeah, I mean, the evidence is in our experience. Our faith takes practice. Our surrender takes practice. Everything takes practice. And it's a building of that relationship with God and spirit. And when we have that relationship, the evidence starts manifesting into our life. Like when we surrender once, it makes it easier the next time because we see, okay, that actually didn't feel so bad, and the results actually worked out. And when we start seeing that evidence in our life, it makes it much easier to have a relationship. But when we have a relationship with God based off of fear or inferiority or shame or guilt, that's never going to manifest good results because those are ego feelings. So our relationship is being tainted by ego.
Yeah. That is true. And what I have realised over the years, looking into everything, is that God never wants you to have fear, or the universe never wants you to have fear. It wants you to have love. It's all about peace, knowledge, and acceptance. And unfortunately, man-made people have instilled those fears into us and instilled us to think this is the correct way of doing things, when really we should just listen to what our higher power is saying to us and how we should connect.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that intercepts that connection is that it's become very common to believe that ego serves a purpose, and I disagree with that wholeheartedly. In spirituality, it's ego. In religion, it's the devil or the enemy or whatever names people have for it. And I don't believe that it serves a purpose. I believe that the stronger connection that we have with God or spirit, the less those feelings come up. So like, I know for myself, I've lived in a lot of fear in my life. And the person I was 10 years ago, I can't even recognize to the person I am now. And it didn't come from purposefully trying to eliminate fear. It came from just knowing God so much and so deeply that fear doesn't even come up that much. And when it does, I can speak a truth to it and know that that's eliminated. It gets dissipated, because every fear that can come up, whatever it is, God has a truth to counteract that. And as long as I know God's truth, I live more fearlessly every day.
Yeah, I see what you mean. That's true. Yeah, I definitely can relate with that. That is so true. And also what I found as well, that ego is just you trying to hide who you truly really are.
Oh yeah, it comes out in many, many clever ways. It also comes out in who you really are, meaning God. I mean, it wants to, anything that is your authentic Christ or holy self, ego wants to convince you otherwise. And ego kind of comes out as, well, oh, maybe that's just part of my personality. Like, I used to think that it was just part of my personality, that I didn't like to go out in public, that I was introverted. Like, I would hear words like that. I'm like, oh yeah, that's me. But when I really looked at, why don't I go out in public? Because I'm terrified. I'm terrified to talk to people. Well, that's not God. That is something else. I can chalk it up to, I love psychology, so I could just say, well, it's just a psychological thing. Some people are wired differently. Or I could really look at that and say, I'm letting myself be afraid, and I'm letting that fear drive my actions, which means I'm letting ego rule my consciousness.
Yeah, that is so true. That, I guess, like, everyone has a different experience with the ego, and everyone has a different experience with our higher self as well, I guess. And it's understanding what is real and what is the fear that's holding us back.
Yeah. There are some things that it's like, I've just kind of started asking myself, like, what's the harm in this? Because if I just have a personality trait, like, I don't have to look at everything and be like, that's ego and it's holding me back. And, if I have a personality trait that's not harming anything, then who cares? That's just my personal preference. Like, I don't have to be outgoing, like, that's that will probably never really be my personality. I just am kind of a bookworm. I'd rather sit at home and read a book and have some tea. Like, that's just my personality. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not ego.
Mm.
But just looking at what the purpose or the driving forces behind things, because if I'm staying at home reading a book because I'm too scared to leave the house, that's something I should probably look at and work on, but if it's just like, yeah, I'm just not really that like networking kind of girl, then, who cares? That's fine.
Yeah. I guess it's sometimes, what's the word? Like coming, I've forgotten what I was going to say now. It was just there a second ago. Like we sometimes get in the way of ourselves without realizing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And it's knowing...
Yeah, I mean... Oops. Go ahead.
Sorry, carry on. It's okay.
Yeah, I mean, in spirituality, we get in our own way a lot. I mean, I think it really stems a lot from that inferiority that we all really feel deep down.
Mm.
And that kind of breeds a lot of getting in our own way, and I think that we make things more difficult than they need to be. I think and I'm so guilty of this. Like, I'm not pointing fingers. I'm so guilty of this. Like that, again, that like need for, I need to be better. So what do I need to do?
Mm.
And that in itself gets in our own way because we don't let God or spirit talk to us. We don't let it guide us. It becomes like a very human based, what do I do? Kind of a type A, how do I do my spirituality better? And it's not really something that you do. It's something that you are. Yeah. And it's letting that holiness come out instead of getting in our own way and focusing so much on doing or practicing more or, manifesting more. It's really just getting out of our own way and just letting spirit move through us.
There is something that it's kind of linked, but it was something that happened to me actually a week ago, Christian, and I was sat in this restaurant with my partner, and this lady and I just suddenly connected. They were sat next to us, and she is a scientist, and she kept going on about, facts about spirituality and life, because she was asking what I did. And in that process, I realised that sometimes we're so obsessed with facts that we forget that we just need to feel. And it's the same with spirituality. You just need to let go of the facts and just feel the process and be in that moment.
That's such a perfect example. Yeah. It becomes such a mental-based thing instead of a heart-based thing. Yeah. And, I love studying. I love reading. I love ancient texts. I mean, that's one of my favorite things to do, but it still keeps me in my head, and I have to keep bringing myself back to heart, because otherwise I just become a know-it-all, but I don't feel it. Like I could be the smartest person on the planet, but if I'm not feeling it, it means nothing. Integration comes from feeling it, not from knowing it.
Yeah. And I think that's what it is within like the spiritual, whether you want to say religious background, is that a lot of people are just focused on the text, but not focused on the practice. And I think if we focus more on the practice, we would have that connection with God or the universe, and we'd feel those feelings. But because we've been drilled from such a young age what it should feel, or we should believe it should look like, is that we don't have that connection with the higher self.
Yeah. And I think that it's so important that we all get back to, what is God? What does that mean? Because we really don't think about that. Yeah. And if God is abundance, then why am I seeing lack? And that's where a lot of religious people will get into, the kind of self-judgment stuff, like, well, because God's punishing you, or God's, but that's impossible.
Yeah.
because God is love. It can't be hate. If God is abundance, it can't be lack. So when we really start looking at, wow, God is just this pure, beautiful, perfect abundance, then why am I keeping that from manifesting in my life? And so this is where we start getting into, where we start examining, past lives, or, we start getting into the doing, trying to uncover, well, where am I missing this? Where am I wrong? And it's not a matter of being wrong. It's a matter of discernment. It's just a matter of a different understanding. Again, we've been understanding from an ego perspective of, you're not good enough. So if we let that go and we look at that relationship with innocence, we start to understand God is this pure, abundant, infinite form. And I am a facet of that. Which means I have the power to manifest all of that into my life. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to align anything or raise anything. That is what I am. So we let go of those paradigms that we need to do anything and just let our being be. And that holiness comes out.
I love that. Yeah, that is so true. Absolutely. Madit, so you're now obviously a spiritual master teacher. So how are you helping people?
Well, like when I'm working with somebody, what I work on is, I usually do 2 different sections. So I have like an undoing section and then the unveiling section. So the undoing is about anyone who's ever experienced any sort of religious or spiritual trauma. And that can be really intense to mild. It could be somebody that just doesn't feel like they have a good relationship with God, or somebody who has a serious aversion to it because of a trauma. And it's starting to shift those paradigms of what is the truth about who and what God is, and what were you told? Because a lot of times we have relationships based off of these negative perspectives. But when we really look at that, we don't have those feelings at all. So the God that we hate is really the God of somebody that we didn't like. It's not so much that God itself we have an aversion to. It's the person who taught us that.
Yeah, that's so true.
So I have my clients go through listing out people who have taught them negative beliefs, or people who have hurt them with religion, or bad spiritual things that have happened, and negative traumas, any of that kind of stuff. So we really dig up a lot of, really the things that fracture us so deeply in our lives. We dig all of that stuff up. And then from there we can lay a foundation. So we start laying the foundation of who and what God is, who and what we are as a facet of God, building that relationship, differentiating between the voice of God and the voice of ego, because again, that's a very clever voice and it likes to take that very holy voice. So building that relationship and understanding the difference between ego and God, and understanding someone else's beliefs and what we really believe, and then how to integrate that into every area of our life. So when I work with clients, we work with money, health, relationships. You name it. Like, we work with everything, because it's not, if you're working with God, that ends up trickling out into everything. So we end up covering everything.
Love it. And yeah, it's true. Everything interlinks, doesn't it? So if one area is clear, then the next area will also need that healing process as well.
Well, yeah, because like when I say the word abundance, 99% of anyone listening is going to think money. That because that is abundance means money. Well, it doesn't. Abundance means an abundance of anything.
Yeah.
So it could mean an abundance of time with your spouse, an abundance of time with your children, an abundance of health. So we can't really narrow abundance to money because it should transcend everything. When you start seeing an abundance of money, there should also be an abundance of health. There should be an abundance of time, of energy, whatever else you're looking for, because you're tapping into the abundance of God. Yeah. That's not just going to hit one area and leave the rest blank, unless that's what you're focusing on. Yeah. But the goal is to have that abundance everywhere, because when you're really knowing God's abundance, it should be seen everywhere.
Yeah. I guess that's why we have those hurdles. We clear one thing and then something else comes up. It's because it's all, like you said, it's interlinked. And I think we forget that sometimes.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, if we're focusing on one area, then it's, yeah, something's going to come up somewhere else. But I kind of explain it like a cold. If you're just focusing on healing a cough or healing a fever, instead of actually healing the cold, you're still going to have other symptoms. But like, we don't get a cold and just say, well, I'm just going to ignore all the rest, and then I'm just going to focus really hard on this cough. And if we do, there's still going to be other symptoms. And then it's like, well, geez, I have a fever too. Well, the fever was there, but you were just focusing so solely on the cough. You kind of forgot that was there.
Yeah. I can see that. That is so true. Oh, I love that. Lindsay, I also wanted to talk to you about something that we were talking about a while back. And it was like, I find that sometimes how we make our partners our God and our spirit and our source. So can you tell us more on that line? Yeah.
Yeah, well, again, when we don't know what God, spirit, source is, we tend to make other people our God, spirit, or source. And it's generally unconscious. I mean, I don't really know anybody that does it purposefully, and I've never did it purposefully, but it's something that we all do. And it's something that relationships is a really big one. So like if our partner's having a rough day at work or having something emotional happen, and they come home and maybe they're not as pleasant as they typically are, how much do we take that personal? If they're triggered by something, an argument is basically two egos going at it. And two egos just full of fear and stress and whatever it is, it's two egos going back and forth, just triggering each other. So when we don't have our partner's validation, we take that so personal that it's somehow a reflection of us. If I know, like I hear a lot of entrepreneurs, they talk about how their partners aren't supportive, how they don't understand it. And they base their worth on how much their partner thinks they can make it as an entrepreneur.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a lot of different ways that it presents itself, but we want our partner's approval. We want their validation. And we want it so much that it's actually something that we should be looking for from God, not from our partner. Because if our partner does come home and they have a bad day and they're triggered and they, say a snide comment or maybe they're just not being very pleasant or whatever it is, instead of our ego being triggered by that, we should be so steady in God or in spirit that our ego isn't triggered by that.
Mm.
But because we're making them our validation and our source, we're taking it personal. And then this goes back to our relationship with God, because we're kind of making them our validation, our God, which goes back to I need God's approval.
Wow. Yeah, I would have never seen it that way. Like, I guess it's like not even just partners, is it? It's just like everybody as well, isn't it? Anyone who's in your life, and if you don't get the right answer, we kind of feel like we need their approval, need to feel better about ourselves, and we expect it.
Yeah, and it is everyone. And one of the other ways that it does come out a lot is with bosses, employers, or clients or customers. We make them our source of income. And I hear people who will say, like, well, I don't really like my boss, but, I just have to go with it because they're my source of income. And I'm like, no, they're not. That's just the face that you're giving your source at this time. But that's not your clients are not our source. Bosses are not our source. Employers are not our source. Those are just the faces that our abundance is coming through us. But we actually limit our abundance, our financial abundance, when we give it to somebody like that. Because what if God wants to give us money in a different way?
Yeah.
But I talk to a lot of people who will say things like, well, I mean, that's my job. I have a paycheck. I don't have money anywhere else. That's my source. That's my source of income. This job is my source of income. And it's like, God could give you money anywhere, but it's because we have this mentality of a job is a source of income. A client is a source of income. That becomes our source. And then we limit that supply.
It's the same thing. We get in the way of ourselves again, don't we?
Yeah.
I love the bit where I didn't realise that actually until you said it. Source of income, source connected to higher power. I never saw that until today. Yeah, wow. And so it's almost like we're giving our power away when we say that that's our source of income, is our job, is our boss. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, we give our power away.
Wow.
Like 99% of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, we give our power away when we're sitting in traffic and we're letting somebody, stress us out. We give our power away when we're letting our partner trigger us, or our client, like if a client comes to someone and they're excited about the income that's going to come from that, and then the client backs out, it's like devastating, like, and it really shouldn't be. But we give our power away constantly to all these outside circumstances, thinking that somehow they have control over us, or that they really influence us in any way. Like, nobody wants to see their partner emotional or upset.
Yeah.
But by us being triggered, we're just allowing our ego to enter the relationship, which makes it human relationship with human problems. But the holier we make our relationships, those human problems don't present themselves as much. And when they do, again, it's holding that truth and knowing, yes, my partner's triggered, but I'm going to stand in the truth while they're stuck in the illusion, because by holding the truth, I hold light for them. If I enter the illusion with them, then we're both going to go crazy. And we go crazy all over each other. And that's what an argument is. Yeah. It's just a bunch of like things that don't make sense, and a bunch of illusion pieces that are thrown around, and nobody wins.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you reminded me of something, that it's kind of like when we step away from the vortex. Like when we're in the vortex, we're all this love and abundance, we're love for each other. And when our kind of ego gets in the way, or like you said, about how we see somebody else and how they're treating us, then we're outside of it. Whereas we should just remember that we're all love, and that we need to just be present in that moment of that feeling.
Right. Well, I mean, if our partner is stressed about finances, like they get laid off at work, if a partner gets laid off at work, they're going to have stress and anxiety about money.
Yeah.
Well, again, that's not their source of income. God is.
Yeah.
So instead of getting into the mayhem and being like, what are we going to do? How are we going to pay our bills? And, getting into the craziness, you instead stand in the truth and say, God is abundance. God will take care of us. Every need we've ever had or will have is met. And everything is taken care of.
Yeah.
But instead, we want to show sympathy. Like, well, I don't, they're feeling upset. They're feeling, well, us getting upset with them, I've never seen that help. But somehow that's like a really common tactic. Like, well, if I just feel bad with them, then they'll feel okay. And I've never seen somebody feel better when that happens.
You just feel sad. Yeah, that's true. You'll be sad for the next few days.
Yeah.
It's like you need someone to kind of
let's be miserable together.
Yeah.
It's okay.
It's like you need someone to snap you out of that emotion, to be like, hey, everything's going to be okay, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, when I first met my husband, he actually did leave his job, and he was really not happy about it. And he called me, and this was like a weekend, and he called me, and he was like, oh, I'm so upset. I left my job, and I just had to. And he was really upset about it, and he was also kind of worried about what I was going to think, because we had just met, and I was like, that's awesome. And he goes, what? And I'm like, that must mean God has something even better, because that was a really good job. And he's like, yeah, okay. But that's the kind of, I could have got into it with him, and then, oh my gosh, what are you going to do now? There's a recession. There's this happening. There's that. Oh, the world. Or I can get excited for him and know that God's going to provide, because why would I be bummed out unless I'm thinking God's going to leave us hanging?
You just hit the nail on the head. It's so true that we always sometimes forget that when we're in that situation, when we're feeling that emotion, actually there's always a purpose behind it. Like God is giving you something better. Mm-hmm. But in that moment, we feel sorry for ourselves. Why didn't I get that job? Or why did that not work out for me? But if we realise that actually you're being saved from something, and that you're going to be given something even greater, then I guess we would all be a lot more like, yay.
Right. Well, the only reason we can be upset is if we don't think that we're going to get something better. True. That's the only, because if we actually thought that we would, then just like that, when a situation would come up, it would be like, oh my gosh, that's so exciting. This didn't work out. Oh, this person broke up with me. That's awesome. Somebody better is around the corner. Yeah. But we look at everything so infinite and so detrimental, instead of actually, and I'm not saying, of course, that we can't have human emotions. I mean, yeah, sometimes things are just upsetting, and we have to process that, of course. But it's the idea of being stuck in that and being upset that something's not working out, when it really should be I love celebrating when things don't work out the way I planned. I like celebrating. Let's call it this. I think it's if we can retrain ourselves to celebrate the things that don't work out the way we plan. Yeah. Then we're just opening ourselves up to amazing opportunities.
Absolutely. And guys, this has actually happened to me in the past. I was made redundant about 5 years ago, Kristin. And instead of crying about it, I actually shook my boss and said, thank you. That's the best decision you've made. And then I know, it's really funny. I went out and had a few drinks with friends when I used to drink that back then. Was really happy. And actually, when I went back to my flat, I was running across the hallway up and down, woohoo, jumping up and down my bed saying, freedom, what's next? And you know what? That was the best feeling ever, because I knew that I had more to do in this world. I knew I had more gifts to share. I was limiting myself and wasn't allowing myself to leave, because I felt that I needed that, like you said, that so-called source of income at that time in order for me to kind of go where I wanted to go, when really I just needed to surrender and just trust the process.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually even done that, like when friendships have ended, which sounds kind of weird, but
oh, I get it.
I've had friendships end that I go out and it's almost like celebrating the friendship and celebrating that there's something better and something new. And I mean, we should be excited by that. Like, if that doesn't work out, that means there's something better. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of party time when something doesn't go that way, you know?
Yeah. I love that thought. I love it. Yeah, it's so true. We should be celebrating more and less being in that emotion. Yeah, absolutely. And my dear, we are coming towards the end of the show. It's gone super quick. And I've loved like the conversation that we're having, because it's just so powerful. And I think it's really important people to realise that we should just embrace who we are and, you know, trust that love with God rather than listening to what other people think. So I wanted to get your advice on something. Like, so what are your 5 top tips for someone who's trying to slay the ego?
I think first it comes to really full circle what we've talked about today, which is knowing what God and spirit, source, universe, whatever you want to call it, knowing what that is. From there, understanding who we are as a divine being, not just as a person or a human being or a personality, but really understanding, if God is holy, what does that mean for us? And then letting go of those false beliefs, those false perceptions, rebuilding that relationship. And then I think it also comes to knowing that we don't have to live with the fear and the stress and the ego, the things the ego does. We don't have to live with that. I explain it like, if the ego is like a really abusive inner voice, like, why? It's like when something really good happens, would you want to call an abusive friend or an abusive ex, or, you know, why would you want to call someone to bring you down?
True.
And realizing that we don't need that voice, I think in itself starts to eliminate it, because it's only there because we've given it the space.
True.
And once we take that away and begin evicting it from our consciousness, it has no permission anymore. The permission is given by us. So if we are afraid and we're letting ourselves be afraid, we're giving it that permission to be louder and louder. So when we revoke that permission, it doesn't have a voice anymore. We've taken away its mouthpiece.
You've got me in thought process again. Those are amazing. Yeah, 100%. I agree with what you're saying. And my dear, where can my listeners find you if they want to get in contact with you?
My website is christiansinclair.com. And I don't know my social media handles, so you can find those on my website.
Perfect. And my last question, my dear, is what are you most grateful for?
In one way, I want to say my family, because that I do have the most gratitude for them. But I have to say my relationship with God, because if I didn't have that, I couldn't enjoy my family, and I couldn't have the family that I have.
Yeah. I love that. My dear, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for sharing your story. And it's been a really interesting conversation. Lots of thought processes as we've been talking. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for just doing the work that you do and helping so many people have a better relationship with, whether you want to call it God, higher source, or the universe.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure. And thank you, everyone who's joined us today.
Oh, bless you. What a powerful interview. Guys, I do hope you enjoyed this interview with Christian. It really blew my mind today because some of the things were just amazing information. For example, about, our higher self, also about our source of income. Wow, that was just mind-blowing for me, to be honest. Unfortunately, as I said, it's the end of the show. Don't forget that you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Get Inspired with Gerds. You can find me on Twitter at IamGerds, that's IamGurds. And before I leave, I want to leave you with this quote. To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. That's a quote by Dodgen. Take care and I'll see you next week. Bye.